Hey guys, tonight we dive into the ancient sands of Egypt, where the sun beats down on golden temples, the Nile glistens under an eternal sky, and yes, you have just been born, a living god. You'd think this is the ultimate upgrade. Private palaces, golden sandals, people fanning you with ostrich feathers. But slow down, because you've also just inherited back-breaking pressure, a deeply dysfunctional family, and a nation of people ready to riot if you blink wrong. Oh, and spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your city and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You don't remember being born, but your name was announced with trumpets and priests, not rattle toys. From the moment you gasped in your first breath, a dozen astrologers were charting your destiny. One says you're destined to be a mighty warrior. Another claims you'll rule over 10,000 years of peace. They're all wrong, of course. You'll mostly be trying to survive your own staff. The first few months of your life aren't spent snuggled in soft blankets. You're swaddled in imported linen and doused in sacred oils that honestly smell like expired olives. While most babies coo and crawl, you're being paraded in front of nobles who bow so low, you wonder if they're searching for coins in the floor tiles. And nursing, forget maternal bonding. You're assigned a wet nurse, probably several who are more nervous around you than they are around cobras. The royal nursery is less cozy bedtime and more mini political arena. Every corner of your crib is watched polished and whispered about. The servant who changes your diaper is under constant surveillance just in case they try to slip in a blessing or a subtle curse. Your first tooth celebrated with hymns and a ceremonial bread offering. That's cute. But sneeze at the wrong time, and priests will declare it a divine omen and insist on 3 days of purification rituals. You little pharaoh are the center of the universe, and a full-time job for everyone around you. By age 5, you're not just walking, you're learning hieroglyphs, math, and theology from men twice your height who won't make eye contact with you. They say it's respect. You suspect it's fear. You're taught to identify 800 gods before your 6th birthday, and you're expected to bow to no one except maybe your father, if he's still alive, and definitely the falcon-headed god Horus, who you're apparently descended from. No pressure. And yes, there's school. Sort of. Your version of school is a temple tutor hybrid, where you're constantly reminded you're divine but also somehow never good enough. Try mispronouncing Mot, the cosmic order, just once, and you'll get a 10-minute lecture about throwing the universe into chaos. Try doodling in the corner of your clay tablet, a disgrace to Thoth, they hiss. Even your toys are ceremonial. No wooden horse for you, you get tiny golden boats and miniature soldiers made of ivory. Sounds fancy, but they're more symbolic than fun. If you break one, the high priest has to decide whether it's a metaphor for impending war. Spoiler, it always is. Outside, the city bustles, but you don't get to see much of it. You peek through screens while carried in a litter by 8 men who are sweating through their tunics. The people chant your name, but you're not allowed to wave. That would be undignified. Instead, you practice your solemn face, the same one you'll wear during funerals, festivals, and probably while constipated. And let's talk about that name. Your royal name isn't just a name. It's 5 names. Yep, 5. There's your birth name, your throne name, your Horus name, your he of the two ladies' name, and one more that somehow means he who unites the land and crushes chaos, or something equally exhausting. Try signing that in crayon. As you grow, so do the expectations. By age 10, you're already being prepped to lead councils. Not play in the garden govern. An entire empire waits for you to have opinions on taxes and trade routes. And don't even think about a tantrum. If you throw one, a royal scribe will etch it onto a limestone tablet for historical documentation. Nothing like having your future biographers read about the time you cried because your honey cakes were too cold. And your body, also under constant supervision. Priests bless your bathwater. Physicians study your bowel movements like they're sacred scrolls. You eat honey-glazed locusts not because you want to, but because they're high in protein and fit for a living god. Every sniffle earns a ritual. Every bruise a protective amulet. And just in case you thought you could sneak out for a moment of quiet in the garden, nope. An armed guard and 2 eunuchs are already there waiting to escort you to serenity. Yet for all that supervision, danger creeps in early. Poisoned figs, venomous snakes in bedchambers, accidental drownings in decorative pools. You learn quickly that some of your cousins smile too wide, and certain aunts are always just visiting the palace when you're sick. Historians still argue whether palace accidents were truly random or carefully orchestrated. One quirky fact, your tutors may insist you practice archery, but you're also taught to run a chariot before you can fully reach the reins. It's basically like putting a 12-year-old in a Ferrari with flaming wheels and yelling, "Turn left!" So here you are, barely in your teens, and already you've had to officiate a crocodile festival, oversee a land survey, and bless a new temple foundation, all while your voice is cracking and your sandals still trip you up. You're groomed to be flawless, but you're also still just a kid. You lie awake some nights in your perfumed chamber, staring at the painted ceiling. Stars and gods and suns all watching you back. Somewhere below the Nile hums its ancient lullaby. And you wonder, not out loud of course, if any of those people chanting your name really know you, or if they just need you to play your role until it's their turn to rule you. Your day begins not with coffee, but with incense. Thick clouds of it. Someone's already burned frankincense at your doorway, and another priest is wafting myrrh into your face with a fan made from ostrich feathers and soft political agendas. You haven't even sat up in bed, and 2 advisors are already whispering about a grain shortage in the Delta, and how it's not your fault, great one, but it might become your fault if you don't look worried about it by noon. As Pharaoh, you are expected to be flawless before breakfast. That means the 2-hour ritual of getting presentable begins now. First comes the black eyeliner kohl, technically made from ground galena and soot. It's not just a style statement. People say it wards off evil spirits and the sun's glare. Joke's on them, nothing wards off the glare of your mother-in-law/aunt, who's still mad she didn't get a 3rd summer villa. They line your eyes with the precision of an engineer designing a pyramid ramp. Then come the perfumes. Dozens. Your personal perfumer dabs scented oil behind your ears, on your wrists, under your knees, because apparently gods sweat too, and no one wants a stinky deity. You're wearing a linen tunic so sheer it might as well be a suggestion. Over that goes a gold collar that digs ever so gently into your collarbone. On your head, the royal Nima's headdress, of course. And guess what? It itches. But you smile through it. You're divine. Divine people don't scratch. Now it's time to hold court, which is a fancy way of saying you sit very still on an enormous throne while everyone around you tries not to say what they actually mean. One official kneels to praise your greatness and casually mentions his cousin needs a new post. Another reports the treasury is slightly under capacity, possibly due to temple renovations, which is the ancient Egyptian way of saying someone skimmed off a few bricks of gold when you weren't looking. Still, you nod serenely. You're not just a king, you're the symbol of order, of Ma'at. If chaos slips into the court, it reflects poorly on you, and then boom, the gods get cranky and the Nile might not flood. It's exhausting being personally responsible for agricultural cycles. You're barely past sunrise, and the political tightrope has already snapped once. A military commander drops to one knee with a dispatch from Nubia. There was a skirmish. It was resolved. Possibly. By whom, unclear. Should you look angry? Diplomatic, kindly, stern, your vizier is blinking at you 3 times, which probably means smile politely and say something vague about divine justice. Ah, yes, divine justice. Your entire country runs on the idea that you are the living vessel of the gods, which is a nice thought until you realize it means people blame you for everything. Flood too low. Your fault. Crops failing. Your fault. Someone tripped during a religious procession and broke their ankle. A sign the pharaoh's heart isn't pure. Better go meditate in the temple for 3 hours and pretend that will help. Meanwhile, your bodyguards are always watching. Not just for assassins, but for signs that you're losing favor with the people. One bad omen, and they'll switch sides faster than a scribe copying a decree for the 50th time. And yes, your scribes are busy. They're recording everything, your words, your facial expressions, even that time you yawned during a festival. That yawn interpreted by a priest as the moment you communed with the goddess Hathor. Lucky save. Midday hits and you're finally allowed a moment to eat. But you don't just eat. You dine. On roasted goose figs dates maybe a little beer with honey. It sounds luxurious, but there's always a taster trying every bite first, just in case someone slipped in a pinch of powdered poison. And you have to chew slowly, like you're savoring divine wisdom, not just hungry. Sometimes, though, you want to eat alone. Not gonna happen. Privacy is not for pharaohs. There's always a servant nearby, a priest humming in the hallway, or a cousin trying to make accidental conversation while accidentally showing off his latest lapis necklace. You make a mental note to move him to the borderlands, or maybe just farther away from the kitchen. In the afternoon, there's a festival to attend. Always a festival. Either someone's being born, buried, worshipped, or has recently turned into a sacred cat. You're wheeled out in a ceremonial bark. Yes, you're literally carried around in a golden mini-boat by 16 very tired men while the people cheer and throw flowers. You try not to sneeze. That could be interpreted as divine disapproval of chrysanthemums. You wave gently, palm forward the correct way. The last pharaoh who waved sideways, not technically cursed, but historians still argue whether that gesture started a civil war. You spot a priest carrying a sistrum, a kind of sacred rattle. He looks right at you, and you remember you're due to make an offering at the temple of Amun this evening. That means you'll be standing barefoot on cold stone chanting lines from a scroll, while pretending you're not worrying about the trade embargo with Byblos. Multitasking, pharaoh style. As the sun sets, your eyeliner is smudging, your sandals are pinching, and your wig, it's not your real hair, let's not pretend, has started to slide slightly askew. But you must continue. There's an ambassador waiting in the palace courtyard with gifts that are actually bribes. You'll pretend not to notice the bribe part, and smile like diplomacy isn't slowly killing your soul. By the time you're back in your chambers, it's late. You try to relax, maybe listen to a harpist play something soft. But there's still paperwork. Papyrus scrolls detailing border disputes, crop rotations, and whether the governor of Memphis is cheating the tax system again. The answer is yes. Always yes. One fringe detail your royal physicians would never admit out loud. All this makeup and perfume, especially the heavy eyeliner, can actually lead to chronic eye infections. So while you may look divine, your tear ducts are crying out for help. Literally. You collapse onto your bed, which is carved from ebony and gold with a lionfoot base. It's majestic. It's also rock hard. A servant fluffs your linen pillow stuffed with reeds, and you briefly consider faking an illness so you can spend tomorrow in bed. Then remember that would only bring more priests and incense. So instead, you close your eyes and hope the gods don't visit your dreams with more responsibilities. The royal family. Sounds impressive, right? A glittering collection of noble bloodlines. Generations of sacred rulers chosen by the gods themselves. But here's what nobody tells you until you're in too deep. Your royal family is basically a pressure cooker filled with ambition, incest, passive-aggressive offerings, and at least one uncle who's plotting your demise with a smile on his face. By now, you're old enough to notice that your family tree doesn't exactly branch. Pharaohs like to keep it in the family, very in the family. Your wife, probably your half-sister. Your mother, also possibly your aunt. Your children. Well, let's just say your family dinners come with a scroll of genealogical footnotes that would confuse even the gods. Historians still argue whether some pharaohs even knew exactly how many siblings they had, because titles like beloved daughter of the king could mean daughter, niece, cousin, or someone who just looked enough like the family to keep things tidy. You're told this is all for divine order, that the bloodline must remain pure so the gods' blessings don't get watered down. But at family reunions, you're just trying to remember who you can legally marry without triggering a plague. Let's talk siblings. Your brothers eye your throne like it's a fresh honey cake. They smile politely, toast your greatness, and practice their coronation speeches in private. One of them is head of the army, which is great for national defense, but terrible for your stress levels. Another is a high priest, and he keeps warning you about dream omens where the gods say he should rule. You're beginning to think his dreams are less divine vision and more ambition with hieroglyphs. Meanwhile, your sisters are complicated. Half of them are royal wives already. The others are being saved for strategic marriages. One is constantly petitioning to be elevated to great royal wife status, which is ancient Egyptian for top queen. The only way to avoid drama is to smile, nod, and hope the next Crocodile festival distracts them. Your mother is powerful and, depending on your dynasty, possibly more politically skilled than you are. She may have helped place you on the throne. She may have threatened to take you off it. She may also be the one keeping certain governors from rebelling. You love her. You also keep a healthy number of guards near her quarters, just in case. And let's not forget your advisors, many of whom are your cousins, uncles, or in-laws. It's like ruling a country through a tangled net of family holiday dinners, each one more tense than the last. Someone is always slightly offended they weren't promoted to overseer of granaries. Someone else is quietly outraged they weren't invited to bless your sacred sandals before a temple visit. You know, normal problems. Oh, and your children. You've got a few, some by royal wives, some by concubines. You're required to recognize the divinely favored ones, which really means the ones your scribes think are least likely to try poisoning your breakfast figs. One son is already being called the Falcon's heir, which sounds majestic until you realize he's also a teenager with zero filter and a tendency to accidentally insult priests. And yes, your children are also married to your other children. Not all of them. But enough that you need a royal genealogist just to keep the dinner seating chart from starting a civil war. There's also that awkward truth no one talks about. Your heirs might not even be yours. Not biologically. Not in a way you'd want to bet your tomb on. Palaces are big, servants are everywhere, and sometimes the gods don't need to meddle when humans are already sneaking around on their own. But your name, your lineage, that's what matters. Or so you're told. Because when the time comes, your successor will carve their own version of history into stone. If they like you, you'll be remembered as the beloved of the gods. If not well, they might just erase your name entirely. Remember that. It'll come up again, with a chisel. Still, there's one thing the royal family can do better than anyone else: ceremonies. Births, weddings, funerals, they know how to put on a show. You remember your first wedding. You were 14. The bride was your half-sister. She wore gold sandals and a wig that defied gravity. You smiled, recited the vows, accepted the wedding offerings, and spent the evening trying to make conversation about temple renovations, while an entire band played flutes and cymbals 5 feet from your dinner plate. One fringe tradition that's still debated: royal families sometimes staged said festival celebrations of the pharaoh's enduring power that included ceremonial races where the king had to prove he could still physically run in front of a crowd, wearing a lion's tail. You're already imagining your cousins snickering as you trip over your own divine authority. And of course, the family drama isn't limited to palace walls. Every province, every temple, every corner of your kingdom has a governor or high priest who's either related to you or wants to be. They use your name for legitimacy. They send you long, flattering letters full of poetic nonsense, and they end every message with a not-so-subtle request: more gold, more grain, more power. You sometimes dream of just sneaking out riding a boat down the Nile without attendants, and pretending for one hot second you're just some regular guy. No crown, no marriage contracts, no relatives asking for just a little more land by the river. But then you wake up to the smell of incense and the sound of 2 scribes arguing over whether your brother's latest temple donation is actually a coded insult. And you realize you're not just Pharaoh. You're the center of a family so tightly woven into your empire that every decision, every breath, every eyebrow raise can ripple through your bloodline like a desert wind. And yes, you'll probably have to marry again next week. Your niece this time. She's very eager. You nod politely. You'll schedule the wedding after the Nile blessing ceremony, assuming no one tries to dethrone you before then. Privacy. That's a myth, they tell the peasants. You, the pharaoh, the living embodiment of divine power, can't sneeze without it being recorded, interpreted, and possibly immortalized in a temple carving. Remember when you tried to sneak an extra honey cake during the festival of Osiris? Yeah. There's a hieroglyph of that now, somewhere near Karnak. You'll be remembered for eternity as he who lacked self-restraint on holy days. Your palace is enormous. Glittering limestone walls, columns painted with scenes of you smiting enemies, rows of servants gliding through incense-thick air. But despite all that space, you're never alone. You move from room to room like a royal cloud of robes and nerves trailed by scribes, guards, eunuchs, advisors, cupbearers, and the occasional sacred cat. Even in your most private moments like bathing, you're never really alone. The royal bath chamber is technically exclusive, sure, but there's still a eunuch monitoring the water temperature, a perfumer adding scented oils, and a guard standing outside just in case a rival prince decides this is the moment to stage a coup. You relax in imported milk, yes, actual milk, because regular water is for peasants trying to feel divine, while some poor servant fans away flies, and another whispers a hymn about eternal cleanliness. And of course the scribes. Always the scribes. They follow you like shadows, styluses clutched ready to document anything that sounds remotely profound. You once casually said, "The moon is peaceful tonight." 3 days later, it showed up in the official annals of your reign as a symbol of your spiritual connection with the celestial world. You mostly just meant the mosquitoes hadn't come out yet. Still, these scribes are power. They write the history, or rewrite it depending on which relative bribed them most recently. Historians still argue whether certain edicts were actually yours or just your vizier freelancing on your behalf because you were too tired to attend a 7-hour grain audit. One morning you try to sneak away for some quiet, just a walk in the garden. You manage to slip past the first layer of guards only to be caught by your high steward, who insists you must inspect the new lotus pond for symbolic resonance. You nod, defeated. Even your moments of escape have been scheduled. And the garden. It's nice enough, palm trees, a sacred pond, birds chirping like backup singers. But there's still that lurking sense that someone's watching. Because someone is watching. A temple official walks behind you with a papyrus scroll jotting down which flowers you pause, at which ducks you smile at, and which fish swim too close to your sandals. Your preferences will determine the offerings at the next feast. Pick the wrong duck, and suddenly your next dinner is a symbolic insult to the fertility goddess. At night, you retire to your private chambers, if you can call them that. It's not a bedroom. It's more like a stage. Massive bed carved from cedar and gold-embroidered linens, lotus-scented air. But again, not alone. Servants rotate your mattress reeds. Others straighten your canopic doll collection for inspiration. You've started to name the dolls. One of them understands you better than your own advisors. Your dreams, when they come, are full of eyes. Eyes painted on tomb walls, eyes of gods, eyes of rivals. You once dreamed you were drowning in papyrus scrolls. The next day, a high priest claimed it was a sign to raise temple taxes. You're not sure what's more stressful, the dream, or the fact that someone interpreted it before you'd even had breakfast. Let's not forget the royal scribes who record your letters. You try to write a personal note to your cousin just to vent a little. Sometimes I think the palace is a cage of gold. Innocent, right? The scribe copies it, sends it, then also makes a version for the archives. 3 weeks later, a foreign ambassador references it in a toast. Apparently, the phrase was seen as a profound metaphor for the burdens of rulership. You were mostly just cranky and low on figs. Even your romantic life is public domain. Love notes, copied by scribes. Intimate gifts, catalogued. One time you sent a necklace to a favored concubine, hand-carved, symbolic of the goddess Hathor's embrace. The note you attached turned into a hymn, sung at weddings for months. Every time you heard it, you wanted to bury your face in your lion paw pillow. One quirky little fact, some Egyptian nobles kept pet monkeys cute, clever, and sometimes disturbingly good at mimicking human gestures. You thought you could have one too. Bad idea. Your pet monkey once copied your ceremonial dance move during a temple blessing. The priests were divided for weeks over whether that meant monkeys were divine or whether you had somehow disrespected the gods through animal mimicry. You had to offer an entire roasted bull just to smooth things over. You start to crave solitude the way others crave wine. But solitude in the palace is a security risk. You might be plotting, or brooding, or worse, thinking for yourself. So they keep you surrounded by noise silk incense protocol. Even your silences are annotated. It's not that you don't love your people. You do in a grand symbolic way. But sometimes you wonder what it would be like to eat bread without being observed, to laugh, without it becoming a religious doctrine, or to cry just once without a priest insisting it means Osiris is mourning too. But for now, you rise from your linen-draped bed, stretch beneath the watchful eye of Horus, painted above your doorway, and let the fan-bearers escort you toward another long day of ritualized performance art. And if you get a moment, just a moment, to gaze out at the stars and pretend they're only watching for their own amusement, not to judge your every move, well, you'll take it. You've probably heard about the pyramids, those massive, shimmering triangles of stone rising from the desert, like the gods themselves dropped them from the sky. Majestic, mysterious, one of the 7 wonders. But here's the thing they never quite spell out. If you're the pharaoh in charge of building one, they're also a 20-year headache made of limestone labor strikes and architectural panic attacks. As pharaoh, the moment your butt hits the throne, your advisors start nudging, Great One. We must begin construction of your eternal house. That's royal speak for, we need to start building your tomb right now, because you could drop dead at any moment, and these blocks aren't going to stack themselves. You nod solemnly, but inside mild panic. Because building a pyramid isn't just about dying in style. It's about declaring your eternal legacy, proving your divine power, and showing up your dead dad's pyramid 2 valleys over. No pressure. First, the location. It has to be close enough to the Nile for transporting stone, but far enough from flooding. The priests argue for one site, your chief architect prefers another, and your astrologer insists that anything west of the 3rd palm grove is cursed. You finally pick a spot, and instantly someone starts mumbling about bad sand energy. You ignore them. You're already 5 weeks behind. Next comes labor. Technically, your pyramid is built by free citizens, not slaves, a surprising historical fact. But free is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. Workers are volunteered during the agricultural off-season, given basic rations, and sent to live in dusty dorms near the construction site. You visit once and try to inspire them with a speech. They're more inspired by the extra beer ration you approve afterward. Thousands of workers, hundreds of engineers, dozens of managers whose only job is to shout. And through it all, one head architect who swears the angle of incline must be precisely 51.5 degrees, or the pyramid will collapse and doom your soul to wander the desert with a jackal head forever. He's intense. Stone must be quarried, limestone from nearby hills, granite all the way from Aswan hundreds of miles upriver. Massive blocks get floated down the Nile on boats that feel like they're constantly about to tip over. If even one of them sinks, it's considered an omen, usually a bad one. Cue the priests, cue the goats, cue another purification ritual where you pretend not to be crying from stress. Every single block is carved, moved, placed by hand. You do the math well, a scribe does it for you, and realize your tomb will take more than 2 million blocks. 2 million. You start to wonder if maybe a really nice obelisk would have sufficed. And don't even get started on the budget. The Temple of Amun is grumpy because you redirected their gold to buy cedar wood for your burial chamber. The governor of Thebes is threatening to withhold grain shipments unless his son gets a supervisory role. You agree reluctantly. The son turns out to be allergic to sunlight and sand. Fantastic. You're constantly balancing design changes. You want your pyramid to have secret passages, because what's the point of dying if you don't get an elaborate booby-trapped maze to confuse tomb robbers? But every new secret passage means more work, more cost, and more priests arguing about whether a left turn near the antechamber disrupts the sacred alignment with Orion's belt. And yes, the stars. Everything must align with stars. Your architect insists on measuring celestial positions every night. Sometimes you think he's just stalling. But then again, when you mention this, he gasps and says, "But great one, if we misalign even slightly, your soul will never reach the field of reeds." Okay, fine. Measure the stars. Again. Occasionally you try to motivate the workforce. You attend a pyramid-raising ceremony. You say a few lines about eternal harmony and the glory of labor. You watch two men nearly get flattened by a granite slab. You smile politely and back away slowly. One day, your vizier brings terrible news the workers have gone on strike. Why not enough garlic in their rations? Yes, garlic. Apparently, it's vital for morale and digestion. You approve the emergency procurement of 100 amphorae of garlic paste. Strike over. Pyramid construction resumes. Historians still chuckle about the Great Garlic Rebellion, but at the time you were dangerously close to faking your own death to escape it. You try to make decisions about your burial chamber. What kind of sarcophagus, what paintings, what spells, but it's hard to focus when your architect keeps pushing experimental stone-lifting methods involving ropes, levers, and blessed crocodile grease. You pretend to understand. There's also the issue of your mortuary temple. You need priests, statues, sacred pools, a hallway that echoes just right so your name sounds divine when spoken aloud. Your wife wants her own shrine nearby. Your mother insists you honor her ancestors with a side chapel. Your third cousin has sketched out an entirely unnecessary lotus-shaped fountain. You approve it all just to get some sleep. One fringe theory, some Egyptologists believe that a few pharaohs may have deliberately altered the pyramid angles mid-construction to compensate for sagging terrain. That's right. You might have to edit your afterlife fortress because the sand won't cooperate. You try not to scream. Still, it's coming together. You walk the perimeter in the evening, the sun bleeding into the horizon, watching the workers chant rhythmically as stones are hoisted skyward. Dust swirls in the golden light. The air hums with history in the making. You imagine future generations seeing this colossal structure and whispering your name with awe, assuming they don't forget it or mispronounce it or chip it off a wall entirely again that's coming. But for now, you allow yourself one moment of peace, one breath of pride. Then your architect runs over waving a tablet. We've miscalculated the entrance slope, divine one. It's off by half a degree. Of course it is. You are a god on earth, yes, but you're also a god who's expected to perform. Not just rule, not just build massive pyramids or sign off on garlic shipments. No, you must also play high priest in an unending calendar of religious festivals. Because what's the point of being divine if you don't have to act it out 6 days a week in front of thousands of sweating citizens and a dozen highly judgmental temple goats? Today, it's the Opet festival. Again. You think it's been only a year since the last one, but your court astrologer insists the stars are right. And besides the people hunger for your presence, you suspect the people are mostly hungering for the free beer roasted goose and dancing that comes with it. But sure, let's pretend it's all about your radiance. First comes the purification. You're scrubbed, oiled, and ritually shaved, yes again, so you may enter the temple of Amun without offending the gods with your hair. Then you put on layers of symbolic regalia, a kilt that cuts off circulation, a falcon-headed pectoral plate, and a ceremonial crown that weighs roughly as much as a clay oven. You climb into a bark, not a boat, but a sort of massive golden shrine on poles, and 20 men begin hoisting you through the streets of Thebes, your face locked in that sacred neutral expression you've practiced since childhood. Smile too much, you're mocking the gods. Scowl, and you're announcing divine displeasure. One eyebrow twitch too high, and someone in the crowd faints. As you float past, citizens shout praises. Children throw lotus flowers. Priests sing hymns about your eternal power, while simultaneously checking if the weather will ruin the goose parade later. You nod as if deeply moved. You're mostly trying not to sneeze from all the incense. Then it's into the temple, where you must perform the most sacred rite of the day, the opening of the mouth ceremony. No, not on you, on the statue of Amun, your heavenly dad. You hold a ritual tool shaped like a forked reed, and open the mouth of the god's image so he can receive offerings. It's a solemn act. You're sweating profusely. Your arm itches. You dare not scratch. After the ceremony, you bow slowly, precisely, the way your tutor taught you as a child. The crowd erupts. Your high priest whispers, "The gods are pleased." You nod sagely and pretend you're not already dreading tomorrow's festival, the Feast of Drunkenness. Yes, that's a real thing. Legend says the goddess Sekhmet was tricked into calming her rage with red beer disguised as blood. So now, once a year, you and your people must honor her by, well, drinking until you collapse in a holy stupor. As pharaoh, you are expected to attend the opening toast, but you mustn't get too drunk. No one wants a vomiting god. In the temple's inner sanctum, you kneel beside an offering table. Bread, beer, incense, and a freshly slaughtered ox, all arranged just so. You whisper the sacred words, half of which you understand. The other half you've memorized from years of repeating them through dry lips and sacred yawns. You're told every phrase opens another spiritual gate. You secretly hope one of those gates leads to a hammock. And of course, the gods are always watching. Or at least their priests are. And their priests have opinions. You spend half the ceremony wondering if the chief lector is judging your pronunciation of duat again. Historians still argue whether the pharaohs genuinely believed all this ritual worked, or if, like you, they mostly played along to keep the priesthood happy and the Nile flooding. But either way, it's your job to believe it convincingly in public. Because if you mess it up, say, forget to offer a roasted goose on the 15th day of Paopa, there's always that one old priest muttering about omens of plague, and speaking of geese later in the day, you're expected to personally bless the sacrificial animals. They're herded before you, bleating and honking, and clearly unaware that they're about to meet their afterlife. You wave your hand, recite a line about fertility and renewal, and one goat promptly headbutts your vizier in the knee. You make a mental note to promote that goat posthumously. You finally return to the palace, body exhausted from all the divine kneeling hands stained faintly with sacred unguents, and ears still ringing from ritual sistrums. You peel off your regalia layer by layer until you're down to nothing but sweat and linen. You think it's over. It's never over. That night, as part of the after-festival observance, you're supposed to commune with the gods in the dream chamber, a sacred incense-choked room where you lie on a lion-shaped couch and attempt to receive divine visions. In reality, you pass out from exhaustion. The next morning, your high priest announces that you dreamt of balance and unity. You nod. You dreamt of bread and not having to wear eyeliner. There's a quirky tradition among some priestly schools. If the pharaoh mispronounces a holy word during ritual, they must perform an act of atonement, like fasting or offering a valuable item to the temple. You once accidentally said, "Bring the perfume" instead of "bring the flame," and ended up having to donate an entire alabaster jar of imported myrrh from Punt. It still hurts. Sometimes you wonder if the gods even want all this ceremony. Maybe they'd be perfectly content with a simple candle and a sincere thank you. But no, your people demand pageantry. The gods demand precision. And you demand a foot massage and a fig, but there's no time for that. Tomorrow is the festival of Bastet, the one with the cats. You sigh, close your eyes, and brace yourself. Here's the thing about ruling Egypt. It's not just about wearing leopard skin capes and posing next to sphinxes. Sooner or later, you have to deal with war. And not the romantic chariots in the sunset kind you've seen painted on tomb walls. No, this is messy, political, and way more sand in your sandals than you'd prefer. Your advisors begin the conversation gently. Of course, Divine One, the Nubians are pushing north. Or your greatness, the Hittites have accidentally moved their border again. You pretend to ponder the stars while silently groaning, because you know what's coming next. You're going to war. You don't get to fight from a distance either. As Pharaoh, you're the commander-in-chief, supreme warlord, and literal war god in human form. That means you're expected to show up, in person, on a chariot, looking majestic, fearless, and ideally without dust in your royal nostrils. So you suit up. Not in armor, really. Egyptian pharaohs didn't wear full metal like some clunky knight. No, you get gilded scale mail embroidered sashes and a helmet with a cobra that looks like it might strike someone mid-sentence. Your chariot gleams. Your horses are groomed and anointed with sacred oils. You step aboard, wave your scepter, and try not to look like you'd rather be inspecting irrigation systems. Once the campaign begins, things move fast and also very slowly. Fast in the sense that your scribes are already drafting victory steles before the first arrow is shot. Slow in that your army has to trudge across scorching deserts for days, stopping every hour to sacrifice to the war gods, chant battle hymns, and chase runaway pack animals. You finally reach the enemy border. You set up camp. You're informed that the enemy might not show for another week, or they might be hiding behind that suspicious-looking ridge, or they've already fled. Historians still argue whether one of your greatest victories actually happened, or if the enemy just decided not to attend your dramatic military performance. Still, you make a show of it. Trumpets blare. Shields shine. You give a speech, something about divine vengeance and the Nile's unstoppable flow. Your generals cheer. You look heroic. And then you climb into your war chariot and immediately realize the wheels squeaking It squeaks all the way into history. Battle begins. If you're lucky, it's mostly archers. If you're not, it's close combat dust clouds and screaming that doesn't sound poetic at all. You swing your khopesh, the signature curved sword of Egyptian warriors. It's more ceremonial than practical, but still effective at making you look dangerous. One quirky battlefield tradition. Some Egyptian commanders brought trained monkeys into battle. They'd screech leap and generally terrify enemy troops with chaotic monkey energy. You've never used one, but your cousin swears by them. You're just trying not to fall off your chariot. The fighting ends. Bodies lie still. Or they don't, and you spend the evening treating the wounded and wondering if that arrow nicked something vital. Your high priest thanks the gods for your triumph. Your soldiers cheer your name. Your scribe writes his enemies fell before him like wheat before the harvest. You were mostly hiding behind your general, but sure, let's go with that. And then comes the real challenge: diplomacy. Victory means negotiations. You have to meet with surviving enemy leaders, accept their tributes, and sign peace treaties that make you look magnanimous even if you're secretly exhausted and sunburned. You nod as they offer you gold cattle, exotic dancers, and sometimes daughters. You've got more concubines than pillows at this point. One visiting king sends you a letter written on clay: "Great Pharaoh lion among men, accept this offering of my eternal friendship." You roll your eyes, but send back a box of lapis lazuli and a polite threat. Back home, your people rejoice. Your court artists immediately begin carving epic scenes of your bravery. Never mind that most of them weren't even there. You're depicted single-handedly slaying 5 men with one thrust of your sword, looking muscular and unfazed. You quietly request they reduce the belly fat on your statue. They nod. You later see that they gave you abs. You keep the statue. But war isn't all glory and murals. There's the cost. Your treasury is bleeding. Temples want compensation for borrowed soldiers. Farmers complain about a labor shortage because so many men were conscripted. The gods apparently require an additional offering because of all the bloodshed, something involving 2 bulls, a priest's wig, and 20 jars of imported wine. And your nobles, they're restless. A successful war means promotions, rewards, and titles like Overseer of Northern Triumphs and Commander of Sand and Steel. You invent half of them just to keep everyone happy. Someone suggests making a general into a living god. You gently suggest they settle for a new villa near Memphis instead. You return to the palace to find your vizier has already drafted a poem about your divine courage. It includes the phrase, "Thunder of the gods" 5 times. You consider editing it. You don't. You're too tired. One fringe theory that always amuses you: some believe that pharaohs occasionally faked enemy armies to justify internal power plays. Build a few fake tents, throw some paint on captives, announce victory. You don't believe it, of course. Mostly. Probably. Still, you can't help but notice how many people benefit from your glorious campaigns. The temples get gifts. The generals get status. The scribes get new metaphors. You get another scar and a memory of accidentally stepping in a puddle that definitely wasn't water. At night, you soak your feet, look up at the stars, and wonder if all that sand is finally out of your ears. Spoiler, it isn't. You'd think being pharaoh would mean you're the one giving all the orders. You sit on a throne. You wear a cobra on your forehead. You've got 20 titles, half of which involve words like eternal unconquered or beloved of the horizon. But surprise, you're also completely at the mercy of the priests. And not just any priests, the temple priests. The guys in long linen robes who smell like frankincense and speak in riddles. They don't answer to you, not really. They answer to the gods. And you, well, you're sort of co-workers, technically. Let's start with Amun's priesthood in Thebes. The biggest, richest, most annoyingly powerful group of god worshippers in the land. Their temple complex is larger than some cities. Their chief priest has more land than some foreign kings. They control gold mines, grain silos, herds of sacred cattle, and entire teams of scribes. In theory, you're the high priest above all others. In practice, they own half the economy and look at you like a temporary inconvenience. You need their blessings to maintain Ma'at, that sacred order that keeps Egypt from collapsing into chaos. Without it, the Nile might not flood properly. The crops might fail, the gods might get cranky. So you show up to rituals, you donate lavish gifts, you act humble while they wave incense and chant things that definitely sound passive-aggressive. And let's be clear, these aren't gentle mystical hermits. They're political sharks in linen. They argue over doctrine like lawyers, they scheme behind temple doors. And they absolutely remember that time your great-grandfather tried to cut their funding. They haven't let it go. Today they want more land. Again. The high priest of Amun comes to you with a perfectly calm face and a suggestion: donate 3 more villages near the delta to the temple estate. For divine harmony, he says. You nod while calculating how much tax revenue you'll lose. He smiles, knowing he's already won. And it's not just Amun. There's Ra's cult in Heliopolis Osiris worship, in Abydos Isis's fiercely loyal fan base in the Delta, and Ptah's engineers in Memphis, who worship blueprints almost as much as they worship the god. Each temple demands offerings, festivals, construction projects, and carefully worded praise. Get one thing wrong, forget to sacrifice a goose, misplace a cow, and someone declares the kingdom is out of balance. Historians still argue whether pharaohs were truly in charge of religion or just constantly reacting to whatever the priesthood demanded that week. You suspect the latter, especially when the priests start warning of unusual dreams, which usually means we want a bigger temple gate. One time your astrologers and the temple oracles get into a spat over a lunar eclipse. One group says it's a bad omen, the other says it's a divine cleansing. You're caught in the middle, nodding at both and trying to prevent a public panic over the moon disappearing. You end up declaring it a time for inner reflection. Everyone pretends that's what they meant. You think about cutting temple power. Briefly. You even draft a quiet proposal. Then you remember what happened when Akhenaten tried that. Whole statues smashed. His name erased. Temples defaced. His mummy possibly relocated to a lesser tomb. Yeah, maybe not. Let's talk about temple wealth. These places are banks. They lend grain. They fund shipbuilding. They store gold jewelry, exotic trade goods, even perfumes from Punt. You try to audit one once just to see what's really in the back rooms. The priest responds with a 6-hour lecture on sacred accounting and a warning that your questions may disturb the god's balance. You back away slowly. Meanwhile, your court is full of temple-trained bureaucrats. Half your advisors used to be scribes in Amun's archives. They know which papyrus trail leads to what. They also know which divine laws are open to interpretation. You suggest a new tax on linen exports. They say it violates ritual purity. You raise an eyebrow. They start quoting the Book of the Dead. You drop the idea. There's also the problem of sacred animals. The priests insist you honor them. All of them. Cats, bulls, ibises, crocodiles, hawks, you name it. One day a sacred cow gets sick, and suddenly your palace is hosting 3 high priests, a state-funded vet, and a ritual healing ceremony involving lotus petals and 7 kinds of oil. The cow survives. You are given credit. You are also given a bill. And yes, you have to fund tombs. Not just your own, but the priests too. High-ranking temple officials expect elaborate burial chambers filled with offerings, statues, and enough amulets to make a dragon jealous. You suggest a more minimalist approach once. They look at you like you insulted Ra himself. You wonder sometimes if the gods are amused by all this. Whether they watch the endless processions, temple politics, and sacred accounting with divine chuckles. One fringe belief even suggests the gods enjoy chaos, that a little disorder makes life more interesting. You secretly hope that's true. It would explain a lot. Still, you play the game. You donate land. You attend blessings. You pose solemnly beside sacred pillars. And once a year during the Feast of the Valley, you ride in procession across the river to honor the dead. You smile, nod, and try not to think about how much power you're borrowing from men in robes who speak for silent gods. In private, you sometimes light your own small flame at night. No priests, no incense, no hymns. Just you, the quiet, and a simple prayer. You don't know if it reaches the gods, but for one moment you feel something close to peace. Then a messenger arrives. The priests of Thoth want a new scriptorium. Immediately, you sigh, rise, and put on your best divine expression. Being pharaoh isn't just about gods and temples and glorious battles. It's also about family. And let's be clear, royal families in ancient Egypt. They make modern drama look like a polite tea party. From the moment you're born, you're not a child. You're a political asset. A future deity in training. Your first rattle is probably gold-plated. Your first word was likely translated into divine prophecy. And your first birthday party may have included a public blessing and at least 2 sacrificial goats. Festive. And then there's your upbringing. You're surrounded by tutors, guards, and advisors from birth. You're taught hieroglyphics, astronomy rituals, and how to sit absolutely still during a 6-hour incense blessing without falling asleep. No playing in the dirt, no sneaking honey cakes. If you scrape your knee, there's a formal lament. If you sneeze, someone records it as a sign from the gods. Now you're grown and you're pharaoh. You've got royal blood, divine blood, they say, but so does your cousin, and your half-brother, and your other cousin, and your cousin's cousin's suspiciously well-dressed son. The royal family tree is more like a royal vine, tangled, ambitious, and full of thorns. And guess what? You're expected to marry within it. Yes, really. To keep the divine bloodline, pure Egyptian royalty often married siblings, half-siblings, or close cousins. You try not to think about it. Your chief wife is your sister. She's smart, stern, and excellent at pretending to enjoy royal banquets. She also knows how to navigate court politics like a seasoned general. You respect her. You also know not to cross her. But that doesn't stop you from having secondary wives, concubines, daughters of foreign kings, political marriages. Before long, you've got enough romantic entanglements to fill a scroll the length of a bark sail. And that means children. Lots of them. Here's the catch. Each child has a claim, a potential future, a power base. And every noble at court is watching your kids, wondering which one might rise, which one might be useful, which one might be persuaded to act early. Historians still argue whether certain pharaohs were assassinated by their own relatives or merely died of suspiciously sudden fevers. You sleep lightly. You try to raise your children right. Your eldest son is being groomed to follow in your footsteps. He practices rituals, leads processions, even does a very convincing impression of you in court. But your second son, a poet, writes moody hymns about the moon. Your third son, obsessed with chariots, keeps accidentally setting fire to the training grounds. Your daughter's fierce, clever, constantly underestimated by your ministers and terrifying in a debate. You secretly think your youngest daughter would make a better ruler than any of them. Too bad the priesthood would collapse if you named her heir. Or worse, pretend to support her, then suddenly discover an ancient law that says otherwise. You've seen it happen before. Family dinners. A study in tension. You're seated in the middle, surrounded by smiling faces and a palpable fog of ambition. Someone always brings up an innocent question about succession. Someone else makes a pointed comment about divine favor. Your sister wife quietly reminds everyone who actually controls the grain supply. Dessert is awkward. One quirky royal tradition: giving your children military titles while they're still toddlers. Your 3-year-old niece is already commander of the Southern armies. She still can't pronounce lotus, but the title looks great on her birthday stele. Sometimes you dream of simpler families. You hear stories of farmers with 3 children, a goat, and no palace intrigue, no assassination rumors, no one writing secret messages in eyeliner on papyrus leaves. You sigh. And then there's your mother. Royal mothers are powerful, revered, worshipped even, but they also remember every embarrassing moment of your life. She sits beside you in court, correcting your posture, reminding you of that one time you cried during a thunderstorm. She's also very friendly with the high priest. Too friendly, perhaps. You suspect she's subtly steering policy through a mix of temple gossip and passive-aggressive compliments. Your in-laws, they're watching. Always. One of your wives is the daughter of a Mitanni king. She smiles sweetly, but her letters to her father are full of coded phrases and carefully phrased complaints. You know because your scribes intercept and translate them before forwarding. You're pretty sure she's lobbying for a new palace wing. You try to keep peace. You grant titles. You assign distant governorships to restless uncles. You organize feasts and give expensive gifts to nephews who keep accidentally showing up armed. You host public celebrations where everyone smiles and claps and no one mentions the poisoned wine incident from last year. But sometimes it slips through. A cousin is found dead under mysterious circumstances. A royal steward vanishes. A niece starts wearing protective amulets shaped like knives. You quietly increase your guard and stop drinking anything that wasn't poured in front of you. Still, you try to hold it together. You're Pharaoh. You're the divine glue that keeps this glittering mess from imploding. So you host another banquet. Toast another alliance. Hug your children and hope they don't try to poison each other before the next solstice. And as you retreat to your chambers exhausted, you glance at a family portrait carved in alabaster. Everyone looks serene, harmonious, eternal. You know better. If you thought managing the gods and your tangled family wasn't enough, wait until you step into the royal bureaucracy, the sprawling, labyrinthine machine that actually runs Egypt. Spoiler, It's not all golden tablets and smooth hieroglyphs. More like piles of paperwork, nagging officials, and endless meetings that could have been emails. You might imagine yourself as a godlike figure effortlessly issuing commands and watching your kingdom hum like a well-oiled chariot wheel. But in reality, you're more like the CEO of a very, very old corporation with hundreds of departments, half of which hate each other, and the other half just want you to sign off on their budgets. First, there's the vizier, your right-hand man or woman depending on the reign. They're supposed to be your closest advisor, the guy who knows everything from tax revenues to irrigation schedules. But beware, some viziers get a little too comfortable. You'll find yourself reading reports about how your trusted official threw lavish banquets with grain meant for famine relief. Awkward. The vizier oversees a team of scribes who love paperwork more than a cat loves naps. They keep meticulous records, grain storage, labor quotas, construction projects, even complaints from villagers who claim their neighbor's donkey insulted their wife. You wonder if there's a scribe assigned just to recording donkey-related grievances. There probably is. Taxation is its own headache. You've got to keep the granaries full, the treasury heavy, and the nobles content. Taxes come in many forms: grain, cattle, labor, precious metals. The tax collectors ride around like less friendly versions of Santa Claus, except instead of presents, they take your goods and maybe your second-best sandals. No jingling bells. One quirky bureaucratic tradition. Every year, there's a counting of the people and cattle. Basically an ancient census, but with a lot more shouting and attempts by farmers to hide extra goats. It's a logistical nightmare, but essential to keep the state functioning. If you miss it, the scribes start panicking about divine disorder, and you're stuck explaining why you forgot. Irrigation management is another royal headache. The Nile's flooding is sacred, but also unpredictable. Your officials must calculate when the flood will arrive, how high it will rise, and where to divert water. Get it wrong, and fields flood, crops drown, and famine looms. You spend countless hours signing off on flood reports, looking at watermarks, and occasionally chasing down disgruntled engineers. Then there's the army administration. You have thousands of soldiers, but keeping track of who's on duty, who's on leave, and who's just disappeared to join a barbershop quartet is no small task. Supply chains need to move food weapons and chariot parts. The logistics are like organizing a desert version of Amazon Prime, but slower and sandier. Historians still argue whether the pharaohs truly understood this complexity or simply delegated and hoped for the best. You suspect it was the latter. Your most memorable bureaucratic moment, signing a stack of papyri so tall you accidentally knocked over a vase of lotus flowers. The vizier raised an eyebrow. You smiled sheepishly. Your courtiers often complain about slow paperwork. You once joked that the only thing moving slower than the royal chariot was the approval process for temple renovations. The joke got laughs, but nobody dared speed anything up. You try to inject some efficiency. You suggest streamlining tax collection or digitizing records. The scribes stare at you like you're proposing a magic spell. We prefer the elegance of papyrus, they say. Fair bribery. Oh yes, the royal bureaucracy is rife with it. Officials might misplace a tax bill or grant a favor in exchange for a golden necklace. You catch a few and punish them, but others just get better at hiding it. It's the ancient equivalent of office politics, but with scarabs instead of coffee breaks. Public works are a major part of the bureaucracy's focus. Roads, canals, temples, and granaries require planning and labor. You have a network of overseers who manage thousands of workers, from skilled artisans to conscripted peasants, keeping everyone fed and paid a daily challenge. One fringe theory suggests some pharaohs inflated worker numbers to show off grand achievements. You can almost imagine the royal scribe adding 200 extra artisans just to make that new obelisk look more impressive. Speaking of obelisks, your scribes have a habit of exaggerating your achievements. The Divine One built a monument so tall it pierced the sky. You nod along, but sometimes wonder if it's more poetry than fact. At least the stone's still standing. Despite all this, you know the bureaucracy is the backbone of your reign. Without it, Egypt would fragment into chaos. But you also know it's a slow, imperfect machine, sometimes frustrating, sometimes inspiring, always full of unexpected paperwork. At night, as you sift through the day's decrees, you wonder if future pharaohs will look back and marvel at your administrative genius or just chuckle at the mountain of papers you left behind. Either way, you'll need another cup of that sweet date wine before tomorrow's meeting with the grain tax collectors. Now that you've wrestled with God's family drama and bureaucracy, let's talk about one of the less glamorous but absolutely vital parts of your job: keeping the peace across Egypt's vast and diverse territories. You're Pharaoh, the ultimate authority, but the kingdom isn't one big happy family. It's more like a patchwork quilt stitched together by local governors, nomarchs, and military commanders, who sometimes act like mini pharaohs themselves. Egypt stretches from the Mediterranean in the north to the first cataract of the Nile in the south, with deserts, oases, and cities scattered along the river's fertile banks. Each region has its own customs, its own nobles, and its own ideas about what it means to be loyal to you. So your job includes making sure these local leaders don't forget who's boss. You appoint nomarchs to govern the nomes, the provinces, and give them authority to collect taxes, organize local labor, and enforce law and order. But here's the catch: these nomarchs can get pretty comfortable in their positions and occasionally start behaving like kings in their own right. Some even build private armies or commission grand tombs rivaling your own. You nod politely at court, but keep a close eye. One of your favorite games: sending royal inspectors on surprise visits to provinces. These guys have the job of sniffing out corruption, tax skimming, and insubordination. They're like ancient Egyptian auditors with clubs. Sometimes the local nomarchs bribe them to look the other way. Sometimes the inspectors just disappear under suspicious circumstances. You try not to think about it. When rebellions flare up, which they do, you send your armies south or north to squash them. Often these uprisings aren't about overthrowing you personally, but more about local grievances, unfair taxes, droughts, or old family feuds. You issue decrees promising justice and prosperity, but the people know that justice sometimes means harsh punishments, and prosperity is for the elites. Historians still argue whether Egypt was ever truly unified under a single pharaoh, or if it was more like a fragile alliance held together by force and diplomacy. Your experience leans toward the latter. The unity is a constant balancing act. One false move, and the entire kingdom risks unraveling. You also maintain relationships with neighboring kingdoms. Nubia to the south is rich in gold and precious stones, but occasionally gets restless. The Levant to the northeast offers trade and potential threats from charioteers or mercenaries. Your diplomats send lavish gifts, arrange marriages, and sometimes send stern letters written in exquisite hieroglyphs. One fringe but fascinating idea: some scholars believe pharaohs used exotic animals like lions and giraffes imported from Nubia, not just for spectacle, but as political tools, gifts that impressed foreign rulers and reminded locals who had the best zoo. Internal security means dealing with spies, informants, and palace intrigue. Your trusted agents roam cities and villages reporting rumors and plotting potential threats. Sometimes a simple whisper can lead to arrests, exiles, or worse. You try to maintain fairness, but paranoia creeps in. You remember that crocodile dung sunscreen, sometimes loyalty smells just as weird. You also hold court regularly, hearing petitions and disputes from citizens and nobles alike. You do your best to be fair, though honestly, some of the cases are bizarre disputes over goat ownership, accusations of witchcraft, and once a complaint about a priest who allegedly turned a sacred pool murky with too much holy oil. Balancing these roles, judge, warrior, king, and diplomatic strategist wears you down. You often find yourself staring out at the Nile at dusk, wondering if your successors will ever truly hold the reins, or just be puppets of the powerful families and priests you struggle to control. In the end, peace is a fragile gift constantly negotiated with force, favors, and sometimes fear. But without it, the entire kingdom would fracture, and all the treasures, temples, and titles would crumble to dust. You pull your cloak tighter, knowing tomorrow you'll have to do it all again. Even after dealing with God's family bureaucracy and provincial politics, the pharaoh's day isn't over. There's another crucial realm you have to master: the arts of warfare and defense. Because if someone decides to invade or rebel, your fancy robes and golden headdress won't protect you. You've got to command armies, build fortifications, and keep your people safe while trying not to get shot with arrows or chased off by chariots. Your army isn't quite the Hollywood blockbuster version of bronze-clad warriors charging into battle. It's more like an enormous, diverse crew made up of conscripted farmers, well-trained professional soldiers, and mercenaries from neighboring lands. You never know who will show up to the battlefield. Sometimes the army feels more like a reunion of everyone who knows how to hold a spear. You're expected to lead military campaigns personally, at least symbolically. Imagine having to wear full regalia, false beard, crown linen kilt while riding a chariot into the dust and chaos of battle. Glamorous, maybe. Practical, definitely not. Your weapons include spears, bows, swords, and the famous chariots, which were like the sports cars of the ancient battlefield, fast, flashy, and terrifying. Charioteers were elite, and you needed a steady hand and nerves of steel to command one. You have to trust your drivers not to crash into the river or an unlucky camel. Defense is more than just troops. You're responsible for building massive walls, fortresses, and watchtowers, especially along the borders and in rebellious regions. Your architects design these like giant stone puzzles, built to withstand sieges and floods, and sometimes adorned with intimidating carvings of gods and monsters to scare off would-be attackers. Historians still argue whether the famous walls near the Nile cataracts were effective defensive barriers or mostly symbolic deterrents. You suspect they're a bit of both, practical enough to slow enemies, dramatic enough to impress your own people. You also have to keep your navy afloat. The Nile is your highway, and control of the river means control of Egypt. Your fleet isn't huge, but well-crafted reed boats for river patrols and larger wooden ships for transporting troops and goods. Naval battles aren't common, but they happen especially near the Delta, where the Mediterranean and Nile meet. And let's not forget the logistics nightmare of feeding and equipping your army. You have to make sure your soldiers have bread-beer weapons and even sandals. A hungry soldier is a dangerous one, especially when he's wielding a spear. One quirky tidbit: some pharaohs used elaborate war rituals before battle, including donning sacred amulets, reciting prayers, and offering sacrifices to gods like Sekhmet, the lioness goddess of war and healing. You sometimes wonder if these rituals helped or just gave your troops a morale boost. On the battlefield, your presence is a double-edged sword. Your soldiers draw strength from your leadership, but you're also a prime target. Losing the pharaoh in battle would cause chaos worse than a flood season without the Nile. You remember tales of pharaohs who barely escaped death. One was reportedly saved by a loyal guard who threw a shield just in time. You consider assigning more guards to your chariot and maybe a sturdier helmet. And when the fighting's done, there's the delicate matter of victory celebrations. You return home with spoils, prisoners, and triumphal processions. You commission victory stelae and temple reliefs depicting you smiting enemies and protecting Egypt. It's all very dramatic, perfect for your Instagram if you had one. But beneath the pomp, you know war takes a toll. The families who lost sons, the farmers whose fields are trampled, the soldiers who struggle to walk again. You try to balance pride with compassion, though it's a tough role to play. After the crowds disperse and the torches burn low, you sit quietly nursing a bruised ego or a scraped knee from the day's training. You remind yourself you're Pharaoh, protector of Egypt, leader of men and gods alike. But sometimes you just wish you could trade the battlefield for a quiet day by the Nile watching the fishermen and thinking about lotus flowers. By now you might think being Pharaoh is all about power war and politics. But hold on, you're also the cultural heartbeat of Egypt, the ultimate patron of art, architecture, and festivals. In a way, your reign is measured not just by battles won or taxes collected, but by the monuments you build, the music played, and the stories told in your name. One of your proudest achievements is commissioning grand building projects. Temples, pyramids, statues. These aren't just for show. They're the literal and symbolic bridges between the human and divine worlds. When you order a new temple, you're not just creating a place for worship. You're crafting your legacy in stone that will hopefully outlast floods, sandstorms, and rebellious scribes. The construction process is a spectacle itself. Thousands of workers, artisans, and architects gather on dusty sites, carving limestone, hauling granite blocks, and painting vivid murals depicting your divine right to rule. You stroll through these sites, adjusting a staff here, offering a blessing there, making sure everything screams, Pharaoh was here. One quirky fact, some pharaohs had the habit of carving their names over older monuments, almost like ancient graffiti artists asserting dominance. You consider doing the same, but your vizier advises against it. It's frowned upon, unless you want a curse or two. Music and dance are vital parts of court life and religious ceremonies. You enjoy live performances with harps, flutes, and percussion instruments echoing through temple halls. Musicians and dancers are treated like royal treasures themselves, and their performances are believed to please the gods and keep evil spirits at bay. Festivals are your chance to connect with your subjects and the divine. The Opet Festival, for example, is a lavish celebration where statues of gods are carried from temples in grand processions. You participate, waving regally and hoping no one trips on their linen robes. It's a mix of joy politics and religious devotion, a perfect reminder that your rule is blessed by the gods. Historians still argue whether these festivals were genuine spiritual events or elaborate propaganda tools to solidify your power. You suspect it's a little of both. You also oversee the creation of literature and wisdom texts. Scribes compose hymns, proverbs, and tales praising your deeds and offering moral lessons. You sometimes ask for a poem celebrating your latest building project, but the scribes always seem to make you sound like a half-god with an impeccable beard and a flawless complexion. Flattering, but you wonder if it's all a bit much. Your court is a hub of culture where philosophers, priests, and artists debate the nature of gods, kingship, and the afterlife. You enjoy listening to these discussions, even if they sometimes remind you that you probably won't survive this, at least not without some serious embalming. You sometimes reflect on how your legacy will be remembered. Will people see you as a great builder and wise ruler, or just another ambitious noble who wore too many crowns, maybe both? Either way, your monuments and stories will outlive your mortal life, carved into eternity like the stars above the Nile. And as you lay down to rest, you hear distant music and laughter from the palace gardens. The world outside is vast and unpredictable, but inside these walls, your culture blossoms, a living testament to your reign. Now, as the sun sets on your reign, let's dive into the part most people don't talk about, the burden of immortality, the afterlife obsession that shadows everything you do as Pharaoh. You might think death is just the end, but not for you. No pharaohs live on forever, or at least that's the goal. Your entire life is basically a prep course for eternity, with elaborate rituals and tombs designed to keep your spirit comfy and well-fed long after your last breath. You start early planning your tomb, because unlike modern folks who might just want a simple grave, you're building a monumental house for your your eternal self. The pyramids, yeah, those were the early attempts. Later royal tombs get more intricate, hidden deep in the Valley of the Kings, carved into cliffs, and decorated with spells and scenes from the Book of the Dead. Imagine trying to pick out which treasures and foods you want to bring to your eternal crib. Statues, jewelry, favorite chairs, even boats to sail the afterlife's rivers. You hope the embalmers do a good job, because a well-preserved body means a happy spirit, and you definitely don't want to be a restless ghost haunting your own palace. You also have to make sure your priests perform daily rituals at your tomb. Offerings of bread, beer, and incense must be fresh and frequent, or your gets grumpy. Some pharaohs even hire permanent staff to live by their tombs, acting like ancient caretakers or ghostbusters. Here's a quirky tidbit. Sometimes pharaohs included little magic bricks in their tombs, inscribed with spells to protect against evil spirits. You imagine these as the ancient version of a security system, but instead of alarms, they have curses. Historians still argue whether pharaohs genuinely believed in all these afterlife preparations, or if it was partly political, a way to keep powerful priests busy and the public focused on divine kingship. Maybe it's both. The whole death and afterlife obsession colors your reign. You commission grand mortuary temples where priests conduct ceremonies to keep your spirit nourished. You invest heavily in funerary art because every wall painting and statue helps guide your soul through the underworld's dangers. You're not alone in this. Your family, your court, and even your subjects share this belief, making death less of an end and more of a transition. But for you, it's personal. Your legacy, your spirit, your very existence depends on these rituals. You sometimes wonder if this obsession with eternity makes life feel heavier, like carrying a weight invisible to everyone else. You try to enjoy moments of joy and laughter, but the shadow of death always lingers, whispering that your reign is just a prelude to a very long after-party. And when you finally close your eyes at night, you don't just sleep, you prepare for forever. As your reign stretches toward its twilight, you can't help but reflect on the strange, exhausting, and often thankless life of being an Egyptian pharaoh. You've juggled gods, family betrayals, sprawling bureaucracy, rebellious provinces, the logistics of war, cultural patronage, and the weight of immortality, while trying to keep a smile on your face and a stiff upper lip, or, well, a stiff false beard. You've learned that being pharaoh isn't just about power and glory. It's a constant balancing act, a tightrope walk between divinity and mortality. Your command ripple through the kingdom, but they also get tangled in politics, human nature, and cosmic mysteries. Sometimes you're the unstoppable sun god, Ra incarnate. Other times you're just a guy trying not to spill his cup of wine during a long, tedious meeting. The grand monument's lavish feasts and towering statues may fool some into thinking your life was one endless celebration. But behind the scenes, it's a life filled with worry over enemies near and far, restless family members, plotting their next move, unpredictable Nile floods threatening the crops, and priests whose loyalty is as shifting as the desert sands. You can't ignore the irony that your quest for eternity requires so much earthly effort, planning tombs, commissioning spells, ensuring rituals. It's a life lived forward with an eye on the afterlife, a dance between now and forever. One last quirky note: some pharaohs had secret chambers or hidden passages in their tombs designed to confuse tomb robbers. You wonder if any modern explorers have found your own clever traps, or if they just stumbled on a stash of ancient sandals. Historians still argue about the true nature of pharaohic power, whether it was divine or more political theater. You suspect it was a bit of both, like a cosmic reality show with high stakes and no commercial breaks. And as your eyes grow heavy, you realize the pharaoh's life is a story of contradictions, immense responsibility paired with isolation, public spectacle paired with private fears, and the relentless pursuit of legacy shadowed by the certainty of death. So as you lay your head down, surrounded by the echo of Nile waters and the whisper of desert winds, remember this: being pharaoh was no picnic, but it was your destiny carved into the stone of history, as enduring as the sun itself.